Last Monday I uploaded a video on how to reverse into a car park parking space. Reverse bay parking it's known as. And I got a lot of comments about the way I was steering. People saying, do you teach people to dry steer? I'm not allowed to dry steer. Will you fail your driving test for dry steering? What is dry steering and is it actually a problem? This is dry steering. See, I'm turning the wheel, but I am not making the car move forwards or backwards. Is that really a problem? Well, I can turn the wheel just fine, so it doesn't appear to be a problem to me. My car has power steering, so it's quite easy to turn the wheel. If it didn't have power steering, it would be really hard to turn. Nearly all cars have had power steering since the mid-90s, and certainly since the year 2000, every car you buy has power steering. There might be a few specialist exceptions, but your average car, your normal cars you see on your road day to day, do have power steering. So what is the problem? The problem is a lot of people believe that turning the wheel, like I am now, without the car moving puts extra strain on your steering and your suspension and your tyres. But is that really the case? This car has got 159,000 miles on it, nearly 160, all done by learners. Well, not all done by learners, but a lot of it is done by learners, and a lot of it has been spent in car parks or at the side of the road, steering the wheel without the car moving. This car has seen its fair share of dry steering, probably 10 times the amount even any car will ever get in its lifetime normally. And I haven't had any problems with the steering or suspension. And the tyres last for ages. They last a very long time. So as far as I can tell, dry steering does not harm your car. I think it harks back to a long time ago when most cars didn't have power steering and they had big wheels and you didn't even have rack and pinion steering, which is the kind of steering you have today. Maybe those older systems did suffer from dry steering, but in my experience, I've never had a problem with my steering and I dry steer all the time because it's easier. And I get my customers to dry steer when I'm teaching them to drive because it makes life easier. Driving or learning to drive is hard enough as it is. I don't want to add more difficulty than needed by trying to get someone to steer all the way whilst getting the car to move using the brake or the clutch. I actually own a car without power steering and I don't tend to dry steer in that very much, simply because it's heavy. Once I get the car moving a couple of miles an hour, the steering suddenly becomes lighter. I can't give you a demonstration in that car for two reasons. One, it looks like this because it's 19 years old and it is a bit of a rolling restoration, and at the moment it's out of action as I restore the front suspension, not because of dry steering, but just because of rust. And it's hard to demonstrate because you can't feel how heavy the steering is. However, there are two kinds of dry steering though. At least I consider there to be two kinds. I think most people don't, but one kind of dry steering I don't really like. I think that does put strain on your car, and that is turning the wheel when your handbrake is up or you're hard on the brakes. Because when you turn the wheel, the car needs to move a little bit. Now, you don't need to move the car a little bit. You don't have to physically do it yourself. The car's going to shift a little bit on its own. And in doing that, that allows the chassis of the car, the structure of the car, to remain more or less straight. If you press the brake hard or pull the handbrake up hard, when you turn the wheel, you're going to flex the chassis a little bit as those big front heavy wheels that cars have turn with all that pressure they have against the road. That's actually going to be put into the car a little bit. It's going to twist the chassis a bit. You're not actually going to twist the metal of the chassis, it's more your bushes, your suspension bushes, little rubber bits between the connection points between wishbones and chassis. They get put under pressure and that can accelerate the wear on your bushes. It could possibly add a little bit of extra wear to your tyre as well because the car can't move much. So as long as you're not braking hard, handbrake off for example, steer the wheel to your heart's content. If the car needs to move to keep itself level, it will. So the two types of dry steering are dry steering when you're hard on the brakes or your handbrake's up, or dry steering when you're not on the brakes or your handbrake is down. As long as your brakes are off, the car's going to move as much as it needs to keep itself level. In fact, here is a demonstration. I'm now turning the wheel from left to right, and you can see the car is moving about a little bit as I turn the wheel. It's very small, you can barely see it, but it is shifting a bit. If you're on a hill, of course, if you came off the brakes, the car's going to roll down that hill really quick. So you may need to use some brake to keep yourself slow, to stop yourself moving down the hill. Just don't be fully on the brakes, locking those wheels completely still. Just be on the brakes enough to keep yourself very slow without forcing it to be completely stopped. But the amount the car needs to move is so small, you can barely see it with your eye. It's really quite a small amount. Now, to prove a point, I have a tyre tread depth gauge and a white crayon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an arrow on my tyre, like so I can remember which part of the tyre that I've measured. I'm right-handed, I was doing that with my left hand, that's why that was awkward. And I'm going to measure the tread of that part of the tyre. And it comes out at just over 5 mil, just over 5 millimeters of tread. I'm going to put this arrow here by turning the wheel, by moving the car forwards. I'm going to get this arrow on the ground so it's right down at the bottom of the tyre. Then I'm going to move the wheel from left to right 50 times and measure the tyre in the same place again to see if I've caused any wear. Handbrake off, and let's start steering. 1, 2. The neighbours must think I'm crazy. Oh, wow. Lost count now. 1, 2, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Now, if I'm honest, I didn't do that all in one go. I had a little break, took my coat off, because I was getting a little bit hot and knackered. But let's see the results. So as you can see, it's a bit white on the tyre from this loosish surface. It's firm, but there's all little bits of stone and grit everywhere. So that will happen, but let's have a look. And it is just above 5 mil, like it was before. That's about a month worth of dry steering. Now, I know that was quite an unrealistic experiment because I sat there and did that for 50 times, which is probably worse for your tyres than normal because you're generating heat, and it's heat that wears tyres, brakes and clutches. If they're not hot, they don't tend to wear very quickly. I've been driving for around 15 years and I've been a driving instructor for around 11 years. When I first learned to drive, I was taught not to dry steer, and I avoided dry steering for quite some time. I reckon probably 6 years. I know when I started out as a driving instructor, I used to try to stop my customers from dry steering. I kind of gave up after a while because it just made things so much harder. But what's interesting is my tyres last longer now, even though I'm a driving instructor and lots of dry steering happens and loads of emergency stops happen as well, actually, than they did when I first learnt to drive. And that's more to do with the style of driving. I'm a much smoother driver now. I was probably a little bit harder on the accelerator, a little bit harder on the brakes when I was new to driving, and my tyres, if I was lucky, would get somewhere between 10 and 15,000 miles in a front wheel drive car. Now I'm getting 30,000 miles out of my tyres, and they're cheap tyres. I don't buy expensive tyres. I try to buy good quality, cheaper tyres. I get A-rated wet weather tyres. It's the European standard, the European Union labelling of tyres. They get A to F. I just find the cheapest A-rated tyre I can, and generally they perform quite well and they last a long time. Also, if you do really low miles, you're probably not going to get a lot of miles out your tyres, simply because your tyres will die of age before they die of wear, and that does happen. Tyres are good for about 6 years. Certainly don't want to be driving around in a car with tyres that are more than 10 years old, because they are quite dangerous by that stage. Most of the time they would fail in MOT by then anyway, because they tend to develop cracks, but as the tyre ages it gets really hard and it stops performing. If you want to know how old your tyres are, look on the side and it has a date code stamped in it that looks like this. The last two numbers are the year, so this is a 2018 tyre because it says 18. I don't know what the first two numbers stand for. I used to assume it's the month, but I've seen so many numbers over the years of having different tyres that it doesn't seem to correlate with a month. But the last two numbers are the year, and that's all you really need to know, is how many years old your tyre is. Don't have to be precise. Within a year should do the trick. So will you fail your driving test for dry steering then? Of course not. To fail your test, you have to either be unsafe or illegal. And steering the wheel when your car is not moving is neither of those things. At least in the UK. I don't know if you'd fail your driving test in other parts of the world. I had someone comment saying in Ireland, if you dry steer, it's an instant fail. So I got in contact with some instructors from Ireland and they said it's about as true as green leprechauns. So I guess it's not true then, unless green leprechauns are true. I'm not sure. If you're practicing without an instructor, make sure you have insurance. Get £20 off via the link in the description to Collingwood, who provides specialist learner insurance that allows you to practice in a friend or family member's car without risking their no claims bonus. If you want to insure your own car, click on the link to confused.com. I have found that they have the widest selection of cheap insurers for young drivers. So the choice is entirely up to you. If you want to dry steer, you can. If you don't want to, don't. Respect your driving instructor's advice though, it is their car. If they don't want you to dry steer in their car, try not to dry steer in their car. I hope this video helps. If you think it does, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to get my future videos. Until the next one, cheerio.